Before we jump into today's story, drop a quick comment to say hi, tell me your name, where you're watching from, and let me know if you're sticking around till the end. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. Alright, let's get into the story. My name is Eleanor Hayes, though everyone in this small New England town has long since shortened it to Ellie. To outsiders, I was the quiet widow who lived on the shadowed hill, in that sprawling house that looked more like a haunted museum than a home. But inside me, beneath my calm smile and polite laughter, there lived a storm, one brewed over decades of betrayal, grief, and a kind of vengeance I once swore I'd never let swell inside my bones. Friends, you enjoy listening to stories, but you don't subscribe to the channel or like the videos. I request you to please subscribe to the channel right now so that I get more motivation to bring you even more stories. If you help me reach 1,000 subscribers, I promise to bring you extremely best stories with a truly real feel, so go ahead, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and now let's move on to today's story. That was before I heard my son's voice on the phone that afternoon. His words, so careless, so triumphant, lodged like glass in my throat. Yes, yes. The estate is almost in my hands. All that's left is the deal. He spoke quickly, like he was running out of air, but his tone carried that spark, greed, arrogance, the same dark hunger I had once seen in his father, David Hayes. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My hand trembled against the receiver, the long, coiled phone cord stretching from the wall to my ear like a noose tightening. He didn't know I was listening, of course. He thought he'd dialed his business associate directly. Technology fails. Lines cross. And fate, when it's tired of watching, intervenes. That was how I discovered that my son, my only child, meant to carve me out of my life. The estate wasn't just land. It wasn't a slip of paper or a collection of antiques left by fading ancestors. For me, it was the last tether to my parents and grandparents, who had built it brick by brick, dragging their dreams out of immigrant sweat. It was where I learned to read by the fire, where my mother taught me to sew, where my father's calloused hands planted the giant maples that now stretched like guardians around the lawn. It was never perfect. My husband never let it be. David considered it nothing but an investment, a bargaining chip. He never loved the creak of the staircases, or the smell of cinnamon from the old wood beams in winter. He loved what he thought it was worth. And that worth, to him, grew higher than his vows to me, higher than the life we were supposed to build together. But fortune has a way of swallowing men like him whole. When David died 20 years ago in a wreck that no one dared to call an accident, I thought I had finally been freed from his designs. I thought the house, the land, and the memories woven into its foundation were mine to breathe again. But now, hearing my son speak those words, I realized the devil had only shifted bodies. Caleb David Hayes. Born with dark curls and a stubborn jaw, he had looked so much like me as a boy. Yet in his eyes, there stayed a glimmer that belonged only to his father, restless, sharp, forever demanding more. I tried, God knows I tried, to steer him elsewhere. Gave him books instead of business toys, paints instead of calculators. For a while, he seemed to take. He sketched birds in the trees behind the estate and whispered promises to me that he'd never be the kind of man his father was. But when Caleb left for college at 18, he never looked back at the house with wonder again. By graduation, he was already wearing his father's grin, sharp as broken glass, polished in boardrooms and real estate offices. And now he was planning to sell the ground beneath my feet while I was still alive to feel the betrayal. I don't think children ever realize how much silence their mothers keep. The secrets we bury, the sacrifices we make, the dark truths we swallow whole so they won't have to taste them. Caleb never knew the full story of his father's death, never knew how much of his world I had stitched together with my blood and pride. But now, with those words echoing through the receiver, the estate is almost in my hands, I knew my silence had protected him for too long. Revenge is not a sudden thing. It doesn't fall on you like lightning out of nowhere. It starts as a whisper, a tickle in your chest, an ember fanned with every slight and betrayal. By the time it burns into flame, you hardly recognize you've been carrying it all along. That night, after Caleb's words, I stood on the balcony and watched the estate below me glow under the harvest moon. The land seemed to breathe, as if it knew it was under threat, as if it begged me not to let go. And I thought of my husband. I thought of the many ways he tried to bend me, to sell pieces of me the way he sold timber from our woods, or smirked at bankers with their ledgers filled with promises. David was not faithful to me, nor was he faithful to the ground that fed him. His greed killed him, though no jury ever called it murder. Now Caleb was following step for step in his ghost's path. And perhaps it was time, long past time, to remind my son what happens in this family when men put greed before love. The estate holds more than memory, it holds secrets. At night, the halls echo with the footsteps of those gone. I do not mean ghosts in the paranormal sense, though the town folk love to whisper. I mean the deeper ghosts, letters hidden in walls, journals buried beneath floorboards, deals struck in blood. David had not left this world cleanly, despite what Caleb believed. And because my son sought to finish the bargain his father never could, perhaps I owed it to the estate, and to myself, to open the gates of the past and let those ghosts walk again. After all, I had kept the truth buried to protect him. But if Caleb wished to drag me down the same road, he would have to meet his father's legacy head-on. It would not be law that taught him. It would not be the banks, or lawyers, or contracts. It would be me. The morning after I overheard Caleb's call, I rose before dawn. Sleep had fled me, leaving my eyes burning and my bloodstream restless. I moved through the old house barefoot, the wood cold against my skin, and I listened to its sighs and groans. It was alive, more alive than Caleb would ever understand. I made tea in the kitchen, letting the kettle's hiss fill the silence. On the wall above the stove hung the framed portrait of my grandmother, Margaret Eleanor Hayes. She was Irish blood, stern eyes, and a mouth that rarely smiled. She had come to this land with nothing but grit and prayer beads. The estate was her miracle. She was looking at me now, as though to remind me, it is yours to protect, Eleanor. Don't let them take it. I felt the heat of resolve rising in me. It was well past noon when Caleb's gleaming Lexus crunched into the gravel driveway. I stood at the upstairs window and watched him step out, polished in his navy suit, tie loosened but expensive enough to make a statement. He didn't knock like a son visiting his mother. He rang the bell as if he were a man arriving with documents to sign, like a lawyer or collector. I opened the door. His smile was broad, rehearsed. "Mother," he said, arms open as though we hadn't gone weeks without speaking. "You're looking, well." I gave him a thin smile. "And you're looking like your father." That froze him for a split second, but he recovered quickly, stepping inside as though the house already belonged to him. His eyes roved the hall, fine wood, portraits of ancestors, the chandelier older than his existence. He whistled low. "I'm still amazed by this place. You could get a fortune for it, you know." There it was. No hesitation. No affection. Straight to the point, straight to the hunger. "And why?" I asked, my voice calm. "Do you think I'd want to sell my home?" He turned back to me with the smirk I knew too well, the same one that used to play on his father's lips before he talked down to me. "Because, Mother," he said, "it's too much for you. Too much space, too much upkeep. You deserve something smaller. Easier. This estate, it could be developed into luxury villas, resorts, maybe even a golf course. I've already got partners interested. One little contract, one little transfer, and you'd be set for life." "Set for life," I murmured. "And what about my life, Caleb? Do I not live it here, within these walls, beneath these trees your grandfather planted?" He chuckled. "Your sentimentality is sweet, but the world runs on opportunities, not memories." The words stung. And in the sound of that laughter, cold and metallic, I no longer saw my son. I saw David standing before me, with a whiskey glass in his hand and greed in his eye. That was the moment I truly understood, the blood of men who ruined their families ran stubborn in Caleb's veins. When he left that afternoon with a promise to convince me in due time, I went to the study. The air smelled faintly of dust and old paper. In the far corner of the tall oak shelf stood a book few had ever touched, its spine cracked with age, its cover plain and unmarked. David's ledger. He never intended me to find it. He thought himself clever, hiding it behind volumes of Shakespeare I had long since stopped pretending to admire. But I found it 20 years ago, days after his death, and kept it because knowledge is its own form of weapon. Inside that ledger were the kinds of deals a man took to the grave if he had a conscience. Dealings with shady developers, contracts buried under false names, debts disguised as investments. The last entry was dated the week of his death. It was with the same men Caleb now worked alongside. Fate, or perhaps blood, had drawn my son to finish what his father couldn't. But the page told me more, that David owed them more than land. He owed them power. And when he failed, they erased him. I shut the book, my pulse loud in my ears. If Caleb followed this path, it wouldn't just cost me the estate, it would cost him his life. And yet, there was a bitter part of me that nearly wanted him to see where greed leads. That evening, when the moon curled over the estate and the air carried the damp thread of autumn, there came another knock at my door. A man stood there, tall and lean, wearing a suit too fine for our small town. He removed his hat as he spoke. "Mrs. Hayes," he greeted, his voice smooth as oil. "My name is Mr. Langley. I was a friend of your late husband." I should have slammed the door. Every instinct warned me this was tied to Caleb's schemes. Yet curiosity, sharper than caution, kept my hand on the knob. Langley's eyes drifted over my shoulder, into the long hall. Beautiful home. Still standing after all these years. Remarkable. "What do you want?" I asked flatly. He smiled thinly. "To remind you that your husband made promises. Promises still unpaid. Your son has a chance to honor them. We simply hope you'll support his decision." The gall of them! They expected me to bow, to deliver the estate into their greedy hands, as if I were nothing more than a widow who didn't understand the weight of legacy. I met Langley's gaze without flinching. "You already took one, Hayes man," I said quietly. "You'll not take another without stepping through me." His smile faltered. For just a moment, I saw the predator behind the courtly mask. Then he tipped his hat, retreating into the dark. "As you wish, Mrs. Hayes. But time has a way of forcing choices." I locked the door behind him, my hands trembling, but my resolve tighter than iron. That night, I went deeper into the house than I had in years. Past the cellar, beyond the shelves of dusty wine bottles, there lay a door so well hidden it might have swallowed itself into the wall. Few knew of it, David never discovered it. It was my grandfather's secret. With a key I kept on a chain around my neck, I opened it. The iron hinges groaned like beasts awakening. Inside lay the room of records, ledgers and papers older than I was, stacked high in chests and cabinets. Here was the true bloodline of the estate, land deeds traced back through Irish sweat and immigrant toil, contracts signed in quill ink, debts paid and unpaid. And among them, the proof I needed, that the land had never been David's to bargain with. He had forged signatures, hidden documents. The estate's deed was mine, not through marriage, but through birthright. The weight of it filled me with new fire. If Caleb walked the crooked path of his father, then I would show him the truth. But truth alone would not stop him. No, I would have to remind him of the cost of betrayal, just as the estate had reminded his father. I blew out the lantern, closed the hidden door, and whispered to the cold stone walls. If it is war they want, then war they shall have. 3 days passed before Caleb returned, and in those 3 days I slept little. I sifted through my grandfather's records, the paper whispering its truths to me like a choir of stern ancestors. Each document was a shield, a weapon, a testament to the sacrifices of those before me. On the 4th morning, I heard his car again. This time, when he entered, he did not waste himself on pleasantries. He had a folder under his arm, polished, new, the same kind that once arrived in David's hands when deals were moving too fast to hide the sins within. "Mother," he said, placing the folder on the desk between us. "All you have to do is sign." I didn't even look at it. Then it must already be a lie. Caleb laughed, exasperated. "You've let this place rot for decades. I'm giving it a future." A future for whom? Not for me. For us. His voice rose, and a vein quivered in his temple. For me, for the Hayes line. Do you want me scrabbling in mediocrity? This is legacy, Mother. This deal will solidify my standing. There it was again. Not ours. His. Greed, naked and selfish. I opened the folder with icy calm. Inside lay a deed transfer document. My signature line was already forged. His business partner's name decorated the witness line. And at the bottom, in faint, almost invisible ink, was a stamp I knew well. The men his father owed had placed it there. Forging my name, Caleb? My voice was brittle steel. Have you so quickly forgotten the hand that once held yours? His face drained white, then flushed red. Mother, listen, it's just a formality. It makes everything smoother. It's business. Business nearly killed your father, I spat, rising from my chair. And it already killed the honesty in you. Caleb's jaw hardened. He grabbed the folder back, snapping it shut. If you won't help me, I'll get it done without you. You've lost touch with reality. This house isn't a shrine. It's a chain shackling you to the past. Before I could answer, he stormed out, gravel spraying as his car sped away. But he didn't know what I knew. He didn't know that lies written in ink could be destroyed by truths written in blood. After he left, I went back to the hidden room beneath the estate. My grandmother's records, my father's journals, they all told the same story. The estate did not merely belong to us. It was built through ironclad deeds that explicitly passed through the women of the line. Margaret had made certain of that. My father signed nothing without her approval. My mother had owned outright half the lands David tried once to mortgage. I realize now, the men had always schemed, always failed, always been cut down by their ambition. The women preserved, endured, waited. And now the mantle was mine. If Caleb wanted to betray me, he would be the last of the Hayes men to think he could inherit a kingdom built on the bones of women stronger than he would ever be. That Friday, he returned with a softer face, a rehearsed humility. He brought wine, expensive and sharp. Mother, he said over roasted chicken at the long dining table, I'm sorry I pushed. I shouldn't have raised my voice. I just want us to be on the same side. I watched the candlelight flicker across his features, and I saw the little boy he used to be. Those evenings he'd sit beside me, drawing trees in the margins of his notebook. For one breath, I almost wished to believe him. On the same side? I asked quietly. Yes. His eyes gleamed. The partners are hosting a dinner next week. Come with me. Meet them. Once you see how professional they are, how much promise this project holds, you'll understand. Professional. Promise. The same words his father used before debts dragged him into shadows. But this time, I nodded. I agreed. And deep inside, the ember of revenge flared hotter. If he wanted me to meet his devils, then I would walk straight into their den. Not as prey, but as executioner. The restaurant gleamed with gold chandeliers and velvet drapes. The kind of place men bring their wives only once, but bring their partners often. Caleb walked proudly beside me, adjusting his cufflinks as if to signal his worth. At the far corner table sat 3 men. 2 I did not know. The third I recognized at once, Langley. He rose like a vulture from roost. Mrs. Hayes. An honor. I sat across from him, my expression neutral, though bile surged beneath my ribs. Business jargon flew across the table: assets, shares, developments. They spoke as though the estate were already theirs, as though I were merely a ceremonial obstacle. Finally, Langley leaned forward, his voice silk over steel. All we need is your signature, Mrs. Hayes. Your son will be very rich, and you will never have to worry again. I smiled thin and sharp. And what if I have never truly worried to begin with? The silence at the table was heavy as lead. Caleb jumped in, attempting damage control. Mother, please. Don't make this difficult. But I was already rising, my chair scraping back. Difficult as watching my husband die in your tangled web of lies. Difficult as raising a child alone, only to hear him echo the same greed that put his father in the ground. Gentlemen, I will not sign. Not tonight. Not ever. Caleb slammed his palm on the table. You'll regret this. The whole restaurant quieted at his outburst. My heart did not waver. I turned and walked away. But as I left, I caught Langley's gaze. He was smiling, not with amusement, but with calculation. And I knew then, the war for the estate had officially begun. Back at home, alone under the howl of autumn wind, I admitted something to myself. There would be no reasoning with Caleb anymore. He had chosen his path, and it was paved straight into the arms of the men who had devoured his father. I could not save him as a son. But I could save the estate. The revenge I once thought of as a slow flame was now a wildfire. I would burn them all, Caleb, Langley, every twisted partner who believed they could strip my history from me. And I would do it not with guns or blood, not yet. I would do it with the weapons they understood least: patience, truth, and the ghosts of a family they thought only half alive. I went to bed that night with a plan forming like storm clouds in my chest. The Hayes estate would not be stolen. The men would learn, as David had, that legacy built on betrayal always collapses. And if my son stood stubborn in that collapse, then the collapse would take him, too. The autumn air cut sharper each day, as if the land itself braced for conflict. I woke early, restless, standing on the balcony and staring across the sprawling acres of my home. The maples were shedding gold, their roots buried in soil layered with the bones of ancestors. It was time to bring the truth out of the ground as well. David Hayes had not died in some drunk driving mishap, no matter what the newspapers printed and the town whispered. His wrecked car had been found in the river outside Boston, wheels twisted, windshield shattered, but there were too many unanswered questions. The road was dry. His blood was clean. His wallet and wedding ring were missing. But no coroner ever gave me answers, and the police closed the case with greedy haste. I was not shocked. David had dealings with men like Langley, whose shadows reached further than police reports dared. Back then, with Caleb young and my world trembling, I let silence bury the truth. Now, silence was the very thing trying to kill me. That night, I searched through the hidden ledgers again, the ones David had hoped I'd never find. Pages of half-legible handwriting, coded notes, initials I did not recognize. But one set of entries caught my eye, payments marked L, dated just weeks before his death. Each some larger than the last. And beside the final entry, 2 words written in his uneven hand. No more. My hands went cold. He had tried to pull away. David, greedy as he was, finally tried to cut ties. And then, days later, he was dead. It was not the mercy of fate. It was the punishment of men who never forgave. And now those same men had their claws in my son. The following evening, Caleb arrived again, though his eyes were harder now. He had lost the soft pretense of persuading me. Anger had hollowed him. You embarrassed me, he snapped, pacing the parlor. At that dinner you made me look like a fool. Langley says you'll never come around. I raised my eyebrows. Langley says? Tell me, Caleb, when did another man's voice become louder than your mother's? He glared at me, lips pressed to a thin line. You're wasting opportunity, he said finally. Langley told me father almost signed with them before he trailed off. Not from sorrow, but from calculation. Before his accident. That one word struck like lightning. Accident. I leaned forward. And if I told you it was no accident at all? That your father tried to break from them, and it cost him his life? His scowl twitched, disbelief clouded with unease. You're inventing ghosts to scare me. I stood, went to the shelf, and pulled the ledger into the lamplight. I opened to the page marked with the scrawl, no more. Read, I ordered. He frowned, scanning the lines. His lips moved, whispering the entries. I watched color drain from his cheeks. Finally, he closed the book sharply. If this is true, you should have told me years ago. If I had, I said, quiet but freezing, would you have listened? Or would you have been too busy chasing his shadow? Caleb shoved the book back at me. This proves nothing. You're clinging to paranoia. Father lost control of the car, that's all. I won't live in your stories. But I saw the tremor in his hand before he left. I saw the seed of doubt crack open inside him. It was not enough to save him yet, but it was enough to weaken the ground beneath his stride. That night, I sat at my desk and penned a letter, one written not in the trembling hand of an old widow but in the firm, steady script of a woman ready for war. It was addressed not to Caleb, but to Langley. Mr. Langley. I know what you did to David. I know your debts remain unpaid, not by me, not by this family, but by your own hunger. You will not see me bow, nor will you see my son bend forever. If you try to take this estate, if you even place one more finger upon my land, I will bring forth every proof, every document, every ghost I have kept hidden. The law may not have silenced you once, but men like you thrive in silence. And I am finished being silent. Try me. Eleanor Hayes. I did not send it. Not yet. It was bait, a weapon to use when the time demanded. But holding it in my hand, knowing that truth itself had become sharpened steel, brought me a calm I hadn't felt in years. The following Sunday, I caught sight of a car parked beyond the tree line, its black glass gleaming in the weak sun. Watching me. I stepped onto the porch, basket of apples in my arms, and glared into the distance. The car did not move. I dropped one apple into the grass, deliberately, and let my stare linger. Only then did the car roll away, tires crunching with slow menace. They wanted me afraid. They wanted me silent. Instead, they had reminded me of my power. Days later, Caleb returned yet again, this time with fury boiling in his eyes. They're saying you threatened them, he spat. Langley said you're stirring trouble, digging into things you shouldn't touch. I did more than threaten, I said. I reminded them of what they buried. You see, Caleb, your father wasn't just careless on some highway. He was murdered for saying no. His hands clenched. And you think I'll be next? I met his eyes without flinching. If you walk with them, yes. They'll use you until you are nothing. Until your name is ash beneath their boots. Like your father. That struck him. I could see it. His face twisted, torn between defiance and fear. No, he said finally, low and desperate. No, this is different. I'm smarter than him. Stronger. I can control them. I laughed. A short, bitter sound. Control them? Caleb, you can't even control yourself. He staggered back, wounded, furious, yet uncertain. His footsteps echoed through the hall until the door slammed behind him. The estate hushed again, as if holding its breath. I stood in the silence, my grandmother's portrait watching over me, and whispered into the dim light. They think they are hunters. Let them believe it. The trap is almost ready. The estate never slept. Even when I closed my eyes, its creaks and groans sang to me. At night, I could almost hear voices of those who came before, whispering, not haunting, but guiding. They told me the same thing that had been building in my chest for weeks: it was time to strike. The men who thought they could strip me of my life had no idea what lived within these walls. David once mocked me for hoarding the old records of this place, files that seemed useless on the surface. But now, as I laid the piles across my desk in neat rows, I realized something: those chests of paper weren't just history. They were weapons. Receipts of unpaid debts by Langley's construction company when it operated under a different name in the 1970s. Handwritten contracts they forged with other families who mysteriously lost their land. My grandmother signed affidavits documenting how developers attempted swindles generations ago with the very same bloodlines. Langley was greedy, yes, but worse, he was unoriginal. He'd been running the same schemes for decades, feeding on widows and desperate men alike. And I was about to give his ghosts back to him. For the first time since David's death, I drove into town and sat at the bar of the Harrington Inn, the oldest brick building in the county. Folks there remembered more than they said out loud. I wasn't there for whiskey, I was there for Arthur Green. Retired attorney. A man whose back bent with age but whose eyes still crackled with lightning when it came to justice. He had been a friend to my father long ago. Arthur slid into the seat beside me, his cane tapping the floor. Ellie Hayes, he said slowly. Haven't seen you in decades. What storm drags you out of your castle tonight? Not storm, I said, meeting his gaze. War. I laid the papers before him, the copies I had made from the estate archives. His thin fingers trembled as he turned the pages. One by one, his brows arched higher. Good Lord, he muttered. You've got them by the throat. If this sees public record, Langley won't only lose your estate, he'll rot in court. And my son? I asked carefully. Arthur gave me a long, heavy look. If Caleb has aligned himself with them, this will drag him down too. You know that. My chest tightened, but I nodded. Then let it. Arthur leaned closer, lowering his voice. What do you want from me, Ellie? Not to fight for me, I said. To stand with me. When this breaks, I'll need a shield. Arthur's lips tugged into the ghost of a smile. Then you've got one. For your father's memory. For Margaret's. And for you. I put my hand over his, and we shook silently, the pact sealed. When Caleb next came back to the estate, he looked more frayed, hair looser, tie askew, the hollows under his eyes deeper. He was being used by the wolves, whether he saw it or not. "Mother," he began, voice weary, "Langley says you're digging into the past. He says you went to an attorney. Why? Don't you see what you're doing? You're sabotaging me." I turned sharply. "You're sabotaging yourself. You think these men respect you? To them, you are a pawn. A tool as disposable as your father was. Stop bringing him into this." Caleb's shout cracked in the high-ceilinged hall. His hand trembled against the marble table. I stepped closer, so near he could feel my breath. "They killed him, Caleb." He flinched. "They killed your father when he tried to say no. I have proof enough to bury them twice over. And I will. With or without you. What if I don't let you?" His voice was low now, trembling, but the tremor wasn't anger. It was fear. I studied him. For the first time, I saw confusion flickering in his eyes, shaking the arrogance. The boy I raised was still in there somewhere, clawing at the walls of the man he had become. But was it too late? Then, I said coldly, "You'll die trying to protect them. Just like he did." I left him there in the shadows of the hall, trembling between two paths, but I knew which one he was too proud to choose. It was a week later when the county gathered at the courthouse for the annual town budget hearing. It was a modest event, usually attended only by councilmen and board locals. But I made sure this year would be different. Arthur and I arrived with boxes of documents. Caleb was already there, seated beside Langley in his slick suit, looking every inch the dutiful partner. When my turn came to speak, the murmurs in the crowd hushed. I stepped to the podium and placed my hands over the wood. "This town remembers names," I began. My voice did not tremble. "My family has lived on Hayes land for more than a century. We built it with sweat, with honesty, with faith. But some do not build, they steal. They take families' homes, burying the truth under lies and contracts. And I have proof those men are sitting among us today." Gasps rippled as I gestured to Langley. I opened the first file and spread its pages across the podium. These are documents signed by the Langley firm under its former name, Croft and Langley. Records of stolen land, forged contracts, and debts unpaid to families in this very county. The same firm now pushing my son to sell what is not his to give. Langley's face tightened like stone. Caleb looked torn between fury and shock. Councilman leaned forward, cameras clicked, whispers swelled like a tide. I raised my chin. David Hayes, my late husband, tried to walk away from these men. He was silenced in the most permanent of ways. You want to call it an accident? Tell that to his ledger. Tell that to the last words he wrote, no more. And now, they have come for me. For my son. For all of you. Arthur rose beside me, holding yet more papers aloft. These are admissible in court, he announced. His trembling voice carried strength. And they will be submitted as evidence tomorrow morning. The room erupted into chaos. Langley shot to his feet, snarling like a cornered beast. You don't know what you're inviting upon yourself, Eleanor Hayes. I met his glare, calm as ice. Yes, I said. I do. And the flash of a smile crossed my face, the smile of a woman long silenced but never defeated. That night, the estate was silent again, but not in the same way. It was no longer waiting, it was watching. I could feel my grandparents in the walls, my mother in the beams, my father in the old soil. The Hayes women had spoken through me. The war was no longer whisper, it was open, loud, undeniable. But my son's shadow haunted the hall. Would he stand with me, or would he go down with them? I feared the answer. But fear has never saved anyone. Action would. And tomorrow, I would act again. The night after the courthouse, the estate felt charged, like the air before a storm. I could sense the town buzzing beyond the hills. Everyone would be talking about Eleanor Hayes standing at that podium, dragging ghosts back into the living world. But ghosts aren't easily tamed once they're set loose. Caleb came at midnight, his steps heavy across the gravel. His knock wasn't polite, it pounded. I opened the door, and his face looked carved from sleepless hours, red veins in his eyes, jaw tight, hands shaking with rage. How could you, he demanded, storming past me into the parlor. You humiliated me in front of the entire county. No, Caleb, I said softly. I saved you. Saved me? He barked a bitter laugh. From what? From the men who believe in me? From the only future I have? I set the ledger down on the table between us like a loaded weapon. From ending up just like your father, in a coffin before your hair turns gray. He froze, his eyes burning on the book. You keep talking like that, he snarled, but all you've given me is scraps of paper and stories. That doesn't mean he was murdered. I stepped closer. Then let me give you more. Tomorrow, I'll take you to the garage and show you what they returned to me after your father's wreck. The steering column was cut, deliberately. It wasn't an accident, Caleb. It was a message. They hollowed out his life until he was no longer of use, and then they made sure he never crawled free. He said nothing. His face flickered between rage, denial, and something else, fear. It trembled through him, though he held his tongue. But silence can mean more than words. 2 days later, Caleb disappeared. His phone went unanswered. The Lexus never returned to the estate. I knew where he was before I saw it. Langley's car, black, gleaming, a predator's gleam, appeared in town at the Harrington Inn, out back by the old barn where no one asked questions. I parked half a block away and stepped into the shadows. Through the cracked barn door I saw them, Langley in his immaculate suit, Caleb hunched before him like a schoolboy caught cheating. Langley's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a knife. Your mother has become a problem. A thorn that won't stop bleeding. That makes her your problem, Mr. Hayes. Caleb lifted his head. She's stubborn, yes, but she'll. Langley slammed his fist on the crates beside him. She's not stubborn. She's dangerous. You think investors want whispers of fraud? Murder? Ghost stories wrapped in ledgers? She has teeth, and she intends to bite. If you can't control your mother, you're no better than your father. The words hit Caleb visibly. He flinched. I pressed my ear to the wood. Langley's voice dropped lower. Your father thought he could walk away. Do you know what we did to him? He leaned in closer, lips curling into a cruel grin. We cut his brakes. Watched him drown in ice water, gasping like a fish. And no one ever asked the right questions. My stomach turned, bile crawling up my throat, but Caleb's reaction was worse. His face broke, his mouth parting in silent horror. His hands balled to fists at his sides, but he did not strike. Langley chuckled, savage and slow. That's the fate of Hayes men who think they're bigger than the game. So, Caleb, will you take control of her? Or shall I? I didn't wait to hear his answer. I fled into the dark, heart pounding like war drums. When Caleb finally returned 3 nights later, he looked hollowed out, like someone had scraped the marrow from his bones. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before whispering, "Is it true?" His voice was raw, stripped of the arrogance. I nodded once. Yes. They killed him. Caleb collapsed onto the settee, head in his hands. For the first time since he'd begun this war, I saw my son, not the wolf his father's blood had sharpened, but the boy who used to sketch birds under the oak tree. "They want me to silence you," he whispered. "They said I have to." His throat tightened. He didn't finish. "I know," I said. My voice was steady. "That's what they told your father, too. To silence me. To silence himself. He chose greed. And it killed him." His head snapped up, eyes blazing with sudden desperation. "Then what do I do, Mother? If I walk away, I lose everything. If I stay, I lose you. Either way, I'm ruined." "You're not ruined," I said firmly. "Not if you stand with me now. I have enough proof to bury Langley and every man behind him. But I can't do it if you are on their leash." He shook his head violently, tears burning his eyes. "You don't understand. They'll kill me." I reached across and put my hand on his trembling fist. "Then we make sure we kill their power first." For a heartbeat, he looked into my eyes, and I thought I saw the decision rising in him. A spark of Hayes' stubbornness, the kind that built the estate. But sparks die quickly. That night, as I closed the shutters upstairs, the phone rang. The line cracked with static before the voice poured through, soft and cruel. "Mrs. Hayes," Langley crooned. "You should be proud. Your son is more loyal than you think. He's already told us about the ledger. About the files. About Arthur Green helping you." My blood turned to ice. "You're lying." "Am I?" His chuckle slithered like oil. "A mother should know when her boy is cracking under pressure. If you set another foot in court, if you show so much as a scrap of paper, you won't just lose your son. You'll watch him disappear like his father did. Slow. And final." The line went dead. I stood in the dim light, hand pressed to the cold receiver. My son's betrayal was no longer whispers, it was spoken into my ear by my enemy. But grief did not come. Not anymore. Only the wildfire of resolve. If Caleb had broken, then I would make his breaking the very weapon to destroy them all. No more waiting. No more silence. It was time to end this. When morning came, the estate felt different. The air had sharpened, cold and metallic, as though the house itself knew that something was ending, and something else about to begin. Langley thought he won. He thought Caleb's betrayal had handed him my weapons on a silver platter. What he didn't know was that I had prepared for betrayal long before tonight. Living with David had taught me one lesson above all others: men like them will always break their promises, even to their blood. So I had made copies, hidden files, sealed affidavits with Arthur, and scattered proof like seeds across the town. If Langley wanted war, he would choke on every page my family bled to write. That morning, I invited Caleb back to the estate. He arrived, wary, shoulders tense, eyes darting as though expecting Langley's shadows behind every door. "I know you told them," I said, steady but cold. He flinched, shame cutting through him. "Mother, he forced me." He said. "I don't care why," I interrupted. "Your father said plenty of things too. Excuses don't stop coffins." He dropped his gaze. His hands trembled. "Then what do you want me to do?" I leaned closer. "Play along. Let them think they hold us in their fists. Let them believe you've chosen their side. And when they stand before the county again, we pull the ground out from under them. Together, if you can stomach it. His throat worked, dry and tight. He looked at me with the eyes of the boy I once knew, but there was a shadow in them now, darker, older. I'll try, he whispered. It was all I could ask. But trust? No. I hadn't trusted anyone in a very long time. The county courthouse brimmed again, this time thicker with people, heavier with whispers. The documents I'd dropped last week hadn't just rattled Langley's shell, they'd spread like wildfire. Reporters had come sniffing, neighbors wanted answers, families once cheated by developers had found their voices again. Langley strode into the hall with his men, his polished smile turned brittle. But his eyes looked for weakness, scanning every face, digging for my surrender. Caleb walked in beside him, trying to mirror his father's old confidence. But I caught it instantly, the slight twitch in his jaw, the way his hands kept curling. He was caught in two worlds, and only one would survive tonight. The council's gavel echoed, and Langley was given floor time to address allegations. His words dripped honey, but I heard the venom beneath. Wild claims, he called them, a widow's grief twisting paperwork into fantasy. When he motioned to Caleb, urging my son to nod in agreement, the court fell silent. And Caleb, God help him, hesitated. His lips parted, but no words came. His hands shook against the mahogany table. I rose. Wild claims? I said, my voice cutting like a blade. Then perhaps you can explain why your company's original charter lists not Langley, but Croft, a man convicted of fraud in '82. Or why you signed agreements with the O'Connell family promising payment for land never delivered. Or why my husband's steering column was cut weeks after his last meeting with you. Murmurs swelled, louder this time. The weight of the town pressed into that room, heavy as judgment. Langley barked dismissals, called me a liar. But he faltered, just enough. And then came the trap. I turned to Caleb. Son, I said, my eyes locked on his, these men told you the truth with their own mouths. They boasted of killing your father. Speak it now, before this room, before God, before the soil your grandfather built with his hands. Tell them what they confessed to you. A gasp ripple cut through the courthouse like a blade. All eyes snapped to him. Caleb froze. For a heartbeat, I feared he would fold entirely. Fear glistened on his forehead, his lips trembled. Langley leaned toward him, whispering something sharp through clenched teeth. Caleb's eyes widened, his knuckles white. And then, slowly, painfully, his lips moved. They said, his voice cracked, too soft. He stopped, the weight crushing him. Langley smirked in triumph. But then Caleb's shoulders squared. His voice rose, rough but firm. They said they cut my father's brakes. They bragged about it. They killed David Hayes. The courthouse erupted. Reporters shouted. Neighbors pointed. The council pounded for order, but the room burned too hot. Langley's face broke, not into fear, but into fury. He lunged at Caleb, grabbing his collar with sudden violence. Fool, he roared. You've doomed yourself. Deputies rushed forward, dragging him back while the crowd shouted for arrests. And Caleb, panting, shaking, looked at me, his eyes wet, broken, bloodshot. I'm sorry, he whispered. God, I'm sorry. By evening, it was over. Langley and his partners were dragged into custody, charged under more crimes than I could count. The press swarmed, stories broke, and the estate, my estate, stood like a fortress untouched. But Caleb sat on the porch, head in his hands, no triumph in him. When I returned from town, he lifted his gaze to me, hollow. Do you hate me? He asked softly. I studied him for a long time. My son. My betrayer. My savior, in the end. No, I said finally. But I cannot love what you almost became. Not yet. His face cracked, but he nodded. He understood. That night, I walked through the halls of the estate alone. The portraits glimmered in candlelight, the stern eyes of my grandmother, my father's proud jaw, my mother's quiet strength. I whispered to them, "It's done. The house is ours again." But vengeance is never victory. It costs too much. My son bore the stain now, he crossed the line that couldn't be erased. Perhaps, in time, we would heal. Or perhaps not. But one truth stood firm beneath the old beams and maple roots. This estate still belonged to the Hayes women. And so long as I drew breath, it always would. Years have passed since that day in the courthouse. Seasons have turned like the great maples on the lawn, shedding gold, wading through snow, and bursting green again. The estate still stands, quiet in the hills, older than any scandal, sturdier than any betrayal. And I still live here, though my steps are slower now, and the nights feel longer. The house has become both fortress and tomb. Some days, I hear only peace, on others, its echo is a prison of memories. I do not leave often. The land has all I need, orchards, gardens, the sound of the brook that my father once dammed by hand. The town remembers me as the widow who exposed corruption, who toppled a dynasty of liars. They greet me politely in the market when I rarely go, eyes full of respect tinged with a quiet fear. They do not know what it means to weather revenge, to stand in the fire long enough for it to warm you, and then to burn you as well. My son no longer lives here. After Langley's arrest, Caleb stayed in the estate for almost a year. He haunted its halls like a restless specter, never quite daring to leave but unable to stay. Guilt clung to him like a second skin. Sometimes I would find him in the study, staring at his father's ledger. Sometimes on the balcony, staring into fields as though waiting for absolution to come riding across. It never did. Eventually, he left. He said he needed to prove himself far from the land he nearly sold, far from the town that knew too much. I did not stop him. I could not. His road was his own, no longer mine to pave or protect. We exchange letters sometimes. They are stiff, careful, written like truce treaties. He never asks forgiveness outright, and I never offer it freely. Some wounds do not close, they harden into scars that both protect and ache in equal measure. But once, not long ago, he ended a letter with words that startled me. I understand now why you fought. It wasn't the land, it was what it kept alive in us. I wish I'd seen it sooner. For the first time since the betrayal, I let myself weep. Langley never walked free again. The documents buried him alive before he drew a jury's gaze. The fraud was proven, the deaths whispered of, the debts unearthed. He will rot in a concrete box, the steel bars closing where my ledger could not. But prison is not enough. Men like him never suffer the way they made others suffer. They do not drown gasping in river water. They do not fall asleep wondering if their son will carry the same poison. They waste away slowly, not truly punished, only diminished. And yet I smile when I think of him. Because his arrogance was his undoing, boasts spoken in secret that my son could never forget. He revealed his own blade. I simply turned it back toward him. I have wondered many nights if I won. On paper, yes. The estate is still mine. The Hayes name was cleared in the town's eyes. The predators were stripped and caged. But I live alone now, the halls echoing with a silence that presses harder than footsteps ever did. Caleb is not here. The one I fought to protect turned against me before he was forced back. Victory is not the warmth of celebration. It is the cold knowledge that you survived longer than your enemy. And sometimes, that feels more like survival than triumph. Would I do it again? Yes. Without hesitation. Because some things cannot be allowed to fall, not while you still breathe. The estate was never just timber and soil, it was the last ember of generations, proof that we endured. Margaret O'Leary, my grandmother, once carved into her diary a single line I never forgot. Let the men burn with their own fire. The women will rebuild from ash. I became her echo. I became her ash and her flame. The county has changed, too. Developers from the city still circle like vultures, but they no longer dare to land on my hill. The estate has become a story to them, a warning. Sometimes I hear fathers caution their reckless sons, mind yourself, or you'll end up like the Hayes boy. They mean Caleb. They mean the broken vow of inheritance. I do not correct them. When I walk the grounds at dusk, the leaves crunching underfoot, I speak to those who came before me. My father, who planted these trees. My mother, who sang in the kitchen. My grandmother, who built a throne out of nothing but will. Even David, though my words to him are sharper, angrier. And sometimes, under the hush of twilight, I whisper to Caleb as well, though he is not here. You are still mine. Blood cannot be broken. But blood cannot excuse either. If you wish to stand in these halls again, you must come with clean hands. I do not know if that day will come. Perhaps my eyes will close forever before I see him walk the drive again. But until then, the estate breathes with me, and through me, and I with it. I have become its ghost already, alive, but belonging more to its wood and stone than to the world beyond. Sometimes I sit on the porch, wrapped in shawls, watching the sun drown itself in the horizon. The wind stirs the leaves, brushing the porch posts like fingers. And I hear the echo of that call, years ago now. Yes, yes. The estate is almost in my hands. But I laugh now, a bitter, quiet laugh. Because no Hayes man ever held the estate in his grasp. Not truly. Not with power. It was always ours. The women's. The men only ever tried to spend it, sell it, burn it. And the estate swallowed them whole in the end. My voice is the last to tell it. And when I, too, vanish into the ground beneath these roots, perhaps the house will still murmur the truth to whoever listens close enough. That legacies are not measured in deeds of ink, but in the courage of those who refuse to let them be traded away. And my revenge was simply guarding what was already mine.